you're the guy who came up with the concept for the crystal within the lightsaber hilt. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, it is.
Yeah, that was in the Star Wars cross sections book from 20 something years ago. Not to date any of us, but
No.
it's classic. I mean, it's grown into so many things. It's become part of the storytelling. They sell little replicas of those crystals at places like Galaxy's Edge. So tell us about this journey with the lightsaber that you guys have been on.
Well, I'd be glad to, and it's so appropriate that this is happening on Rebel Force Radio because
Yeah.
that was a seed that you planted with getting me back together with Roger after I'd been away from things, because I worked with his legacy before I knew him personally. Then I knew him at Skywalker Ranch and working on the prequels. But after I'd been away with it, you brought us back together. So this is a story about planting seeds and where that leads. And you're absolutely a part of that. So I'm really glad to be sharing this story here.
I'm like the R2D2 in this situation. I rolled up on you guys and showed you a hologram of Roger Christian, and Roger was saying, "Help me, David West Reynolds. You're my only hope."
The truth is stranger than fiction sometimes, right? So,
Yeah.
okay. So let's see. Where we'll start is, so do you know what the original, the very first lightsaber prop was?
The old bulb handle for a camera.
Okay,
Right?
now you're
Yeah.
talking to, it's a good thing you're talking to the archeologist of Star Wars because we can go back farther than that.
Okay.
We can go back, and if you look at Ralph McQuarrie's production paintings, so early on, when the script was still in flux, and George knew that he wanted a laser sword. That was part of his vision for Star Wars. A laser sword goes back pretty far in his development. But early on, the stormtroopers carried these laser swords as well as everyone else. They were just, that was the weapon that was used in this world rather than a gun. There you go. Now, if you look closely at the weapon that Stormtrooper is holding and that the Proto Han Solo character is holding in the background, you'll see that's a one-handed weapon. So what you have here is the equivalent of a rapier. Now, I used to use a rapier when I was fencing. And so this is background that I put into the development of the lightsabers when that became my job. But you see that one-handed dueling weapon there, and those were made as props in the special effects department in England, which is not the same as Roger's set decorating department. They were made, I think it was under John Steers, and they lathe turned, and you can see in some of Ralph's pictures, if you look at the production painting of Luke tackling Darth Vader on the early version of the Blockade Runner, and you see the lightsaber that Luke is holding, it's one of these one-handed rapier-type weapons. So that was the clearest vision anybody had for what a lightsaber would look like. And John Steers, yes, there it is, okay? Now that is what the special effects department, and by special effects I mean the on-stage special effects, that's what they had to go on. Well, they produced these things. They I think it was lathe turned out of metal. They look just like what you see in Ralph McQuarrie's image there, and they were boring. They were not interesting. They were not threatening. Everybody looked at them and said, it's a flashlight. It has to be romantic. It has to have adventure, some sense to it. You know, even a classic Three Musketeers rapier, you know, they've got some style around the hilt. These simple devices based on Ralph McQuarrie's design, in Ralph McQuarrie's paintings, they didn't have to look cool themselves because Ralph's paintings are full of action and vitality and color. The actual lightsaber prop didn't need to look great, but once you get this into 3 dimensions, in our world, the copy of his design looked completely uninspiring. And so those were the first lightsaber props made. When Roger turns his attention to the lightsabers, he looks at those and just thinks, that's not going to work. So it's because they ended up irrelevant in the long-term part of the story that's why that hasn't been something that has been shared, because Roger looked at it and rightly decided that's just not it. That direction is not going anywhere. I have to come up with something completely different than that because it's not going to inspire anybody. So thank heaven, Roger took that upon himself to say, that's not going to work. We have to start over. So that's the original lightsaber prop. It just didn't get blessed by George.
You mentioned that you and Roger had a revelation about lightsaber lore. Is that something you can share with us?
Because this is Rebel Force Radio, yes, I
Yeah.
will share. So we're on stage. It's actually, Roger came to a museum exhibition about the hero's journey and about my career. It was Star Wars meets Indiana Jones, the hero's journey of Dr. David West Reynolds, which is, I love that title. They did a museum exhibition on my career, and more than half of it was about my Star Wars work. And Roger came down to speak and do signings. And we were on stage talking about lightsabers because that's what the fans were asking about. And I was explaining how the original one-handed weapon would have been so much less romantic than the two-handed weapon that Roger came up with. And so he was telling his Graflex story. And then they were saying, well, how did you come up with the idea to do the crystals? And I explained that story, which we can get into if you want to hear about that. But then they heard that I had invented the whole idea that each Jedi builds their own lightsaber, and that is a major milestone in a Jedi's career. The test of their force sensitivity is, can you align that crystal with that incredibly dangerous power source so that the first time you turn on that lightsaber, you produce that arc wave blade instead of an explosion, and that this is a major Jedi ritual. So all of that was material that I created for the first Star Wars visual dictionary. When I came to the ranch and was going to be writing about all this, the lightsaber was just a weapon like a Colt 45 or an M16 that you bought from a factory. And different people had different makes. He's got a Mauser C96 broom handle, and he's got a Luger. But they were just weapons that you bought at a factory. And I thought, I do not want that. I do not want that. How can there be something that makes a lightsaber like a samurai sword? Because George is drawing his inspiration from Kurosawa films, and then that whole samurai aesthetic informs the whole nature of the Jedi. How can their lightsabers be in tune with that? Because a samurai sword was something really special. Only certain people even knew how to make a samurai sword. It was very difficult. It involved special techniques, and sometimes certain techniques would be lost for generations, and a blade would get handed down because these are so special. So how do I give that quality to a technological object? And that's why I came up with the crystals, an organic element. When I was trying to do this at the ranch, people were saying, well, it's impossible because the lightsaber is a piece of technology. So once you've got a device, anyone can copy that device. So your idea is not going to work. And I thought about this, about how do you put an organic element? And I thought it's naturally occurring crystals. That's what's going to be that organic element. And then if it's naturally occurring, it's only force sensitivity because it's too subtle for even a computer to align. And so that's where that came from. And so I don't know, is that part of the story? Is that part well known?
Well, I think so. I think so. But I wanted to follow up to that and ask if you had anything to do with or what your feelings are about this idea of bleeding a lightsaber when it comes to Sith. And we saw it finally in live action in the latest Star Wars series, The Acolyte. So your thoughts about that? And do you have any fingerprints on that?
Definitely not on that. So what I learned from George at Skywalker Ranch was that Star Wars is not a science fiction universe. It's not even just a fantasy universe. It's a mythic universe. And that's a different thing altogether. In science fiction, you can make up anything. You can get into time travel and very esoteric problems that have, when you have time travel, do you go back and prevent the assassination of so-and-so? And you can get into very interesting stories. But the function of a myth is to present stories where the people have choices to make that are going to be like the choices that you and I have to make. So a mythic universe has to echo our universe. Things have to work in the same ways. And that's why George said everything in Star Wars, if it's built right, is an echo of something in our world. And I listen when he says things like that. I don't just let that go past. He says something like that in an interview or where he's talking to people in the art department, and I think, okay, that is a direct insight into how he creates his Star Wars material. That's a major filter that now tells me which ideas is he going to feel are coherent with or are harmonic with the material that he has created, and what doesn't fit. And so that's, I think, my understanding of that is why I had this incredibly high batting average of George approving the material that I created, no matter how new or far out it was, because I respected the process that he told us that he used. It wasn't a secret, but very few people seemed to get that, and they would just go in science fictional directions and make up any wild thing, which science fiction can be very entertaining. But the function of a myth is entertainment wrapping truth. And truth is always
Love
going to
that.
be something that's relevant in our world.